I'm going to show you how to create all the aspects of light and shadow. The light source is the thing that provides light in an image. It can be a lamp. If you're outside, it can be the sun. So in this image here, we see that there's a line going from the light source all the way through my object. The reason I want to do that line is it's going to help me position all of my shadows, okay? This white area here where the light source is pointed is the brightest area in the composition. That's the highlight. This dark band going through across my shape is called the shadow shape. That helps to note the object's shape. So here I'm drawing a round object, so it's a curving shadow. This lighter gray area here, just past the shadows on the edge of the form, is called reflected light. So what happens is light bounces off of surrounding areas and surrounding surfaces and makes this area a little bit lighter, even though it's still considered a shadowed area. This area under here is the cast shadow. So what that is that's a shadow cast by the object onto the surface it rests on. Or sometimes it could just be on like another surface, like the shadow of my hand is below it, even though my hand might not be resting on that surface, okay? So first thing I'm gonna do on this composition is I drew in a circle, I drew in my light source, and I'm gonna draw a line going through the circle. Now we're gonna try to transform this into a sphere. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to position your shadow shape. So it should curve, and it should pretty much be like the same amount of curve over here as it is over here. You want to make sure it's kind of like cut in half by that line going from the light source. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start transforming this from a line into a shadow. This is going to be the darkest area of my shadow shape. Notice the lines that I'm drawing in right now are going up towards my light source, okay? You don't want to go sideways like this, because if you start going sideways, this line's just going to continue to get darker and darker and darker, and you'll never be able to get rid of that line. Because what we want is we want that line to be totally obscured at one point, where it just looks like a dark shadow that sort of fades in and out, okay? Shadows on round objects should not be sharp and dark on the edges. What they should do is they should sort of gradate in and out. So that's a pretty decent dark band. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get gradually lighter as I go towards that light source. I don't want to go all the way there though. I want to leave a little area white because that's going to be my highlight area. You can go up a little bit more on the edges. Like I always have my shadows kind of creep in a little bit more on the sides. So I'm creating some good light tones, but you can still see a really sharp contrast between my dark and my light areas. So I'm going to go in and add a little bit more of like a medium zone here. This will help that area sort of fade out. So what you want to do is you want to gradually just kind of have that shadow fade away into that highlight area. On the bottom then, what I'm going to do is I'm going to gradually fade down into reflected light. Reflected light is actually sort of like a light that occurs in the shadows, and it's going to look more like a medium gray tone. What I'm doing here is I'm actually shading outside of my form a little bit. That's just to make sure that I have a nice even gray tone over here and I'm not leaving like a white ring where I'm trying to stop my lines. All right, I'm going to work on this just for a minute, trying to get these areas to blend out just a little bit more. You could always darken your original shadow shape just a little bit more. Remember, the shadow shape is that dark area, that dark band kind of curving over your image. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, I'm going to clean up my outside edges, and then I can darken my outline on the shadowed side. Doesn't take very long to clean up those edges, and it makes for a really nice, even, reflected light area. Like I said, I'm going to darken the outline just on the shadowed side, so along the bottom and along that right edge, I'm going to get really dark. Maybe even have it kind of creep up into that zone a little bit. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to create my cast shadow. Now the cast shadow, the middle of the cast shadow is basically like over here, like right where that light source kind of touches the ground. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a larger oval that overlaps my sphere and goes clear off the edge of the page. If you're working in a box, like on a worksheet, you could just take that shadow right out of the box if you want to. All right, so there's kind of the idea of my cast shadow. I drew it as light as I possibly could so that the edges can stay soft and fuzzy later, okay? The darkest area of my cast shadow is going to be directly underneath the object. it will have sort of like a crab claw shape where it's like a little darker up towards the top and a little darker up towards the bottom, or down towards the bottom. And then it's just gonna fade out as it moves towards the right. So I'm gonna start turning this dark area into a shadow. Remember, in order to make it look like a shadow, you have to give it soft, fuzzy edges. And any dark area needs to gradually sort of fade out into the light areas, okay? So I'm just gonna try to create a really nice gray zone over here. On the edges of my shadow, I want to stay soft and fuzzy. So I'm going to bring in some medium and light grays all along the edge of my shadow. Now, if you were to look really closely at this drawing, you would see lots and lots of pencil lines, and that's okay. I'm okay with seeing lots of lines. Where the lines are darker and where there's more lines, it looks like a darker shadow. And then where the shadows get a little bit, or where the shadow gets lighter, there's less lines. Like I said, I'm just going to try and like fade off the edge of that paper here. Now, lines don't generally bother me in shadows and on drawings in general, but if they bother you, I'll show you a way that you can kind of quickly obscure the lines. So I'm just going to continue to blend that out. If you want to, what you can do here is you can actually go in with a paper towel and you can smear away some lines. I'd rather you use a paper towel than use your finger though, because it makes for a much more even blend. I'm just going to kind of obscure that area just a little bit and see it looks a lot smoother. You can actually do that on the sphere itself, but just be careful because what it'll do is it'll kind of erase some of your hard work too. Like see that band looks a little bit lighter now. What you sometimes have to do after blending with paper towel is go in and kind of darken this area back up just a little bit. It's like I'm going to bring back in some of those dark tones here on along the bottom. Maybe even along the top edge over here. Anyway, so feel free to add back in darker tones if you need to. The darkest area on any composition should be directly underneath the object. So this area right here underneath should be the darkest area, okay? So that's pretty much the gist of it, you guys. There's one more tool you can use for blending, and that is a blending tortillon. It's basically just like a wrapped up little piece of paper. You can use that for small detailed areas. So let's say I wanted to create like a really soft shadow along this edge. I could get a little graphite or like pencil line on the tip of this tortillon, and I could use that to shade in. But really I wouldn't use it for like blending out this whole shadow. I think it would just take way too long. So I recommend just kind of saving that guy for the small detailed areas. I realize now in looking back at this that I made this shadow maybe just a little bit large. If your shadow's too big or a little bit too dark on the edges, you could always go in and kind of like make it a little bit softer and fuzzier on those edges. Okay, one more thing I want to tell you guys. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to label like light source, highlight, shadow shape, reflected light, cast shadow. I'm going to label them in red just so you guys have them. So like I talked about earlier, the light source is what provides light in an image. I'm just going to label that with an LS right there. Highlight is going to get an HL. If you guys want to do the same thing on your worksheet, that would probably help you to just remember like what is what and what goes where. I'm going to do a line coming away from the shadow shape because the shadow shape's kind of dark. So I'm just going to do a double S right there for my shadow shape. Of course, my pen is failing now. What luck. Okay, I'm going to use an Expo marker. That'll work just as well. So here's shadow shape. Oh my gosh, that works so much better. Okay, there's highlight back there, that white area. This guy along the bottom, this sort of like fuzzy gray edge along there is called your reflected light. I'm going to do another line away from there, and I'm going to do an RL for reflected light. And then in my cast shadow, I think I can just fit a CS right in there for cast shadow. Okay? All right, that's it.